Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation of history's most interesting people. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these fascinating lives. Now, let's meet our guest. For those who may somehow not know who you are you?
Well, I am Katharine Graham, though many of my close friends and colleagues simply called me Kay. For a large portion of my life, I was the publisher of the Washington Post, steering it through some incredibly turbulent and transformative eras in American journalism.
When and where were you born?
I was born on June 16, 1917, in New York City.
What was your given name at birth?
My given name at birth was Catherine Meyer.
Is there a story behind your birth name?
It was simply a family name, but my maiden name, Meyer, carried a lot of weight. My father, Eugene Meyer, was an incredibly successful investor and public servant. He actually bought the bankrupt Washington Post at a public auction when I was a teenager, which completely altered the course of our family's life.
What was your hometown like growing up?
While I was born in New York, we moved to Washington, D.C. when I was quite young. Growing up there, it felt like the center of the universe in terms of politics and power. It was a city of grand institutions, heavy conversations, and strict social expectations, which could feel a bit overwhelming.
What was your family life like?
We lived a life of immense wealth and social privilege, but it was also characterized by a degree of emotional isolation. My father was largely absent, completely occupied by his monumental career and his drive to make the Post respected. My mother, Agnes, was a brilliant art patron and political activist, but she was a formidable, dominant presence, and not exactly the fuzziest maternal figure.
What kind of kid were you?
I was a remarkably awkward, intensely insecure, and shy child. Despite the grandeur surrounding us, I often felt out of place and lacked confidence in my own abilities.
What were your biggest fears growing up?
My biggest fear was simply not measuring up to the towering expectations of my brilliant parents. I constantly worried that I wasn't smart enough, capable enough, or interesting enough to warrant their attention or approval.
What did you dream of becoming as a child?
As a young child, I didn't have a specific blueprint for a career, because women of my social class were expected to marry well and manage households. However, as I grew older and began writing, I developed a quiet yearning to enter the world of journalism.
What were some of your favorite activities in school?
I found my stride when I transferred to the University of Chicago. I loved studying history, engaging in deep political discussions, and working on student publications where I could hone my writing skills.
What was your first job?
My very first real newspaper job after graduating was as a reporter for the San Francisco News. I moved across the country to a city where I didn't know a single soul. My primary task at first was fielding calls from reporters and taking down field notes, mostly relying on my limited typing skills.
Was there a moment where you realized you were different from everyone else?
It wasn't so much feeling superior, but rather realizing the stark contrast between my sheltered, wealthy upbringing and the real world. My first big assignment in San Francisco was accompanying members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union into areas notorious for gambling and crime. Seeing that side of life completely opened my eyes to a reality I had never known.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
When I first started at the San Francisco News, the steep learning curve and loneliness completely overwhelmed me. A couple of days in, I called my father in tears and told him I wanted to quit. He came out to visit and convinced me to stick it out. Choosing to stay, rather than running back to my comfort zone, gave me a taste of true independence that shaped the rest of my life.
What was your biggest break?
My biggest break came under tragic and unexpected circumstances. After my husband, Philip Graham, passed away in 1963, I had to step in and assume the role of president and publisher of the Washington Post Company. I originally thought I was just keeping the seat warm for my son, but it turned into the defining chapter of my life.
What were your biggest struggles before success?
My absolute biggest struggle was an overwhelming sense of imposter syndrome and deep personal insecurity. I entered a deeply entrenched, profane boys' club in the newspaper business. I was highly experienced, yet I constantly found myself deferring to the opinions of my male colleagues, terrified that a simple question about circulation numbers would expose me as inadequate.
Did you ever consider quitting?
Oh, in those early days of taking over the post, the anxiety was near constant. There were many moments where I felt entirely out of my depth and wondered if I should just step aside. But I knew I had a responsibility to my family and the legacy of the paper to keep moving forward.
Were there any specific daily habits or routines that you feel are essential to your success?
Immersing myself totally in the data and the writing was essential. I read the papers cover to cover daily, kept up a relentless schedule of correspondence, and forced myself to sit at the table and listen to our editors and journalists, gradually learning to trust my own news instincts.
What job would you have had if fame never happened?
If I had never been thrust into leadership, I likely would have remained a quiet, behind-the-scenes editorial staffer or a full-time homemaker, as I had happily retired from active reporting for a time to raise my 4 children.
What was your life like before fame?
Before I became a public figure, my life was centered around being a supportive wife to Philip and raising our children. We hosted parties for Washington's political and social elite, and I was content playing the role of the traditional hostess and mother.
How did relationships change after success?
It certainly shifted the dynamics. I became a peer to powerful political figures rather than just a hostess. I also found incredible strength through the women's movement and discussions with figures like Gloria Steinem, which helped me recognize the root of my insecurities and pushed me to champion gender equality within my own company.
Did fame bring happiness?
Fame itself didn't, but the sense of purpose and the discovery of my own strength certainly brought a deep fulfillment. Successfully guiding the paper through monumental moments gave me a confidence I had lacked my entire life.
What was the downside of becoming famous?
The immense scrutiny and the high stakes. When you are making decisions that involve the Pentagon Papers or the Watergate scandal, you are exposing your company, your family, and yourself to massive legal and financial risks, all under the watchful eye of the entire nation.
What misconceptions did people have about you?
Many people initially assumed I was just a wealthy socialite placeholder who wouldn't dare rock the boat or challenge the political establishment. They didn't think a woman could possess the stomach for high-stakes investigative journalism.
What was your darkest moment?
My darkest personal moment was the sudden and devastating loss of my husband Philip in 1963, after his long and painful battle with severe mental illness. He was only 48 at the time, and I was only 46. Facing that immense grief while suddenly holding the future of the company in my hands was terrifying.
What past regrets did you carry that you spoke about?
I often regretted how much I had deferred to men early in my life and career, simply because I had been conditioned to believe they knew better. It took me a long time to realize that my instincts were just as sharp as theirs.
What's something people misunderstood about your life?
People often looked at my wealth and position and assumed everything came easily to me. They didn't see the paralyzing fear and the sleepless nights that went into making the choices that defined the Post's legacy.
Tell me about a time when everything went wrong and how did you handle it?
During the pressmen's strike in the mid-1970s, it felt like the entire production of the newspaper was falling apart under immense hostility. I handled it by standing firm, refusing to back down under pressure, and working tirelessly with our management team to keep the papers printing, which ultimately preserved the financial health of the company.
Did fame and fortune change your life?
Fortune was always a part of my background, but the public responsibility entirely reshaped my character. It forced me to grow from a compliant, insecure woman into a decisive executive who could stand toe-to-toe with presidents.
What personal battles were you fighting privately?
Privately, I was fighting a daily battle against my own self-doubt. Every meeting, interview, or major editorial decision felt like a test designed to catch me out, and overcoming that internal voice was a constant struggle.
Who had the biggest influence on your life?
My father certainly laid the groundwork, but professionally, Ben Bradley, our brilliant managing editor, had a massive influence. Together, we pushed the boundaries of investigative journalism to heights we had never imagined.
What was life like in your final years?
My final years were actually incredibly rewarding. I stepped back from the daily grind of chief executive duties, but stayed highly active as the chairman of the executive committee. I spent a great deal of time reflecting on my life, which brought a wonderful sense of closure.
What were you working on in your career before you passed away?
I poured my heart into writing my autobiography titled Personal History. I wanted to give an honest, candid portrayal of my life, my husband's illness, and the changing roles of women. It was published in 1997, and I was deeply honored when it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1998.
When and where and how did you pass away, and how old were you?
I passed away on July 17, 2001, at the age of 84. I was visiting Sun Valley, Idaho, when I unfortunately suffered a fall that resulted in a severe head injury, and I passed away in a hospital in Boise 3 days later.
What's a random fact about you most people have never heard?
I once played a significant role in changing Washington's social customs. At a prominent dinner party, when the traditional hour arrived for the ladies to go upstairs so the men could discuss world affairs over brandy and cigars, I simply refused to leave. I stayed right there with the men.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you?
There was a biography written about me in the late 1970s called Catherine the Great that contained so many wild inaccuracies and fabrications about my alleged involvement with political conspiracies that my publishers actually pulled thousands of copies from circulation because it was pure fantasy.
What was your most unique habit?
I had a habit of meticulously preserving letters. Even when my father and I were distant during my youth, we built our adult relationship through intense, regular correspondence while I was in college, a routine I maintained with many people throughout my life.
What was your favorite book?
I always had a deep love for memoirs and historical biographies. Reading about how other leaders navigated their own crises always brought me comfort and perspective.
Did you have any known rivalries?
Our biggest rivalry was, of course, with the competing news publications, particularly when we were racing to publish the Pentagon Papers. It was a fierce but exhilarating competition to see who could bring the truth to the public first.
Tell us a story nobody talks about.
People remember the grand triumphs, but they rarely talk about the everyday grind of the early days. Like me, sitting in a small room in San Francisco, desperately trying to type out notes from field reporters while hoping I didn't mix up the details, completely terrified but refusing to show it.
What's your funniest behind-the-scenes moment?
At the premiere of the movie All the President's Men in 1976, it was quite surreal to sit in a glamorous theater and watch Hollywood stars portray the grueling, unglamorous, coffee-fueled nights we spent pacing the newsroom floor during the Watergate investigation.
What advice would you give people chasing success?
I would tell them to trust their own instincts, even when the room is filled with voices telling them they don't belong. Success isn't about the absence of fear. It's about finding the courage to make the hard decision even when your hands are shaking.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
I just want to say that it's vital to remember that history is made by real, flawed, and often frightened people doing the best they can. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Calvin. It was a pleasure to share my story with you.
What an incredible journey through the life of a true trailblazer. From navigating intense personal hardships to leading one of the most influential newspapers in American history, Katharine Graham showed us all what it means to find your voice and stand your ground. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.